Okay, we are apparently running. And let's start the light bulb. Welcome to Evolution Hour on the 27th of October in our ongoing year of doom. Clickety-clack, analog devices, all that cute little stuff. And remember, the tortucanwordpress.com website has all that delightful stuff. There we go. That's available for all to see. We in the Spokane for a variety of areas, including the fact that the furnace has apparently stopped working. So I gotta muddle along until November when I can find out what the hell I think it might be the fuel pump. At any rate, this one is kind of a curious one for our part 2, which will for once not be a matter of creationism. It'll be just actual science stuff on gazelles and non-flying kites, which may sound weird, but when you find out what actually is going on, it's really quite extraordinary. An entire chapter of Sarfati Tay has been absorbed this one episode because it was a pretty slim one. It was on evidence that humans saw dinosaurs, and basically it was a peripheral retread of the standard YEC stuff, and it's a necessity for them because, oh yes, we are talking about Titans, the creationist dinosaur book. And of course, because Earth is only 6,000 years old and humans were around on day 6, then bingo bongo, they had to have known dinosaurs. So they scramble around to assemble theological arguments, largely rewriting the book of Job, historical, in air quotes, legendary stuff, and archaeological paintings and such underpinnings of the dogma. They start off with explicitly describing Behemoth as having a tail the size of a cedar tree, unquote, when Job never claimed that. And even their own text box, Bible section on the bit, only has the standard King James, makes its tail stiff like a cedar. Doesn't say it's as big as a cedar tree. And so they are already interpolating into the text. We're going to have a whole big section on Behemoth and Leviathan and all that in box for their volume 2 that'll be all the grisly little details on it. Anyway, the chapter draws on a very thin range of highly questionable creationist sources. Carl Wieland, David Woetzel, and an assortment of others. And they continue to repeat a lot strained twaddle, such as the claimed Cambodian stegosaur glyph, which again will also be being discussed in Rock's Volume 2. Hi, gang. Hi, Vesta. But even the Sarfati and Tay have evolved to the point where they are kind of dicey on the Ica stones, which are these supposed depictions of dinosaurs from down in Central America that are forgeries, and modern ones at that. That have lured a whole bunch of people into that, as well as the Acambaro figurines. So they do semi-draw the line on the Ica stone stuff. Anyway, a couple curious things, however, in their creationist sources were relevant that I thought we'd follow up on. And we're putting the links up to all this stuff so everybody can follow along. There was an undated post on the Vietnamese emperor seeing a flying dragon. No date on the bloody thing, which was kind of curious. So I did a little cross-checking to find out who was alluding to this, and it turns out that CMI's Facebook page put a post up about it, presumably at the time it came out in 2016. So I'm provisionally dating it at 2016. Anyway, their Facebook post proclaimed every Vietnamese knows the story of the Emperor Ly Tai To, who, when traveling from the ancient capital Ho Lu to Bac Ninh, passed by the Red River city of Dai La and saw a giant creature. Well, the slightly longer CMI article itself had the 11th century emperor quotes, he saw a giant creature, a dragon, fly up out of the Red River into the sun, unquote. Now, so hey are clearly written off of this very and totally unsourced account. There's no source references at all in it. To transform that into a rhetorical question, speculating, could this have been a pterosaur such as Quetzalcoatlus, which has a wingspan of 15 meters? Ooh, big, big, big. Okay, so first off, CMI offered no sources for the legend at all. And so therefore no details on the size of the critter or the wings or wingspan of the alleged dragon. But we may note also that Vietnamese royalty had long associated their monarchies with dragons, which were always depicted as long, sinewy, snake-like beasts, including during that emperor's time. I looked around on some of the references, of which virtually everything about the legendary lore in Vietnam are in, like, some of which are reasonable sounding and some of which are peripheral. But the upshot is, as near as I can tell, the original story that everyone knows involves the emperor having a dream in which he saw this big dragon fly out of the river. And that's the reason why he decided to move the capital down to Hanoi in Vietnam. So there's no reason whatsoever to be thinking that this is other than a magical hallucination. He didn't see a dragon. He had a dream about a dragon. And indeed, if he had seen a full-out pterosaur, you'd think that the depictions of dragons during the period would have reflected what the emperor would have physically seen. Nope, still in that long tradition of long snake-like critters that play out a role. The Vietnamese cult, their legends have that the whole Vietnamese people were born when a dragon boinked an immortal, and la-di-da, that's how the Vietnamese people came out. Fit that one into CMI's Young Earth Creationist dogma. Needless to say, none of that came up in the CMI post either. So this is one of those examples that I actually had to insert into the new book section because that's a doozy. That's as strained an interpretation as you can get, and it's kind of revealing that Sarfati and Tay were riffing off of such a flimsy source and a not that recent one at that, and no primary sources. Then the other little creationist paper that pops up here is one from 2017, Cedar, a guy named Joshua Cedar, that was commenting on the Cambodian stegosaur carving. And Sarfati and Tay are clearly citing him just on a little peripheral thing about the supposed, the little stegosaur veins on the horn features on the back were supposedly directly carved in to the body of the critter. But the problem is Cedar's argument is very skeptical of the whole Cambodian stegosaur thing. And there's no indication in Sarfati and Tay, other than the title of the piece in the reference bibliography, that this is something that's not supporting or recommending continued belief in the Cambodian stegosaur motif theory. So yet again, they're really striking out on the misrepresentation of source material. As it happens, this whole bloody chapter has only 2 technical papers that pop up, which is why I was able to get to the whole thing in a relatively short spurt. The rest of it was all creationist material, like Cedar and that, which means that their creationist source material is a big chunk bigger than the technical papers. And they're still running at about, they're coming up on 70% misrepresentation of sources, so it's not helping them anyway. Anyway, 2 of the technical papers in this chapter, both recent and pretty tendentious. There's one Cosette and Brochu 2020 on the systematics of the very fragmentary Mesozoic crocodilian Deinosuchus, all of the details of which Sarfati and Tay are not calling attention to. They're simply trying to bring up little minor details that somehow or other imply that there's features that maybe could be connected up with Leviathan. Pretty strange. And then they came up with The main paper, of course, was on the systematics of crocodiloidea versus alligatoridea, which are superfamilies, by the way, as to what falls into what. And it turned out is not an easy task because, again, relatively fragmentary material, especially in the case of Deinosuchus, as the paper explicitly called attention to. And a 2025 paper et al., more recent, obviously one which Sarfati and Tay wouldn't have anything to know about, went into very great on it being more closely related, likely, to the very neat, detailed, systematic breakdown of the little critters and stuff going on in here with the crocodilians rather than the alligators. This is the expanded phylogeny that I'll be putting a link up to. That's an open access paper from Nature Communications Biology. The other paper is one from 2019, Bozenecker et al., on the extinction of the giant megalodon sharks around 3.6 million years ago. This would have been roughly the time that Ice Age cycling is starting to sink in because of Australia moving so far away from Antarctica that the circumpolar current picks up, and also coming into that period when we're starting to get the breakup and closing of the Isthmus of Panama, which cuts off circulation between the Atlantic and the Pacific. So the paper in general is talking about the paleoclimate and distribution data on these Pacific sharks to suggest that this may have had a factor in their extinction during this period. Sarfati and Tay are only bringing it up because of a very convoluted, tendentious bit where they're trying to suggest that dinosaurian predators like Tyrannosaurus and all that would have started out as little juveniles in those same sharks, and therefore wouldn't have been much of a bother for humans coexisting with dinosaurs during the pre-flood times. A really strained argument, and which means they're basically paying no attention whatsoever to the content of the paper, which could account for why the Sarfati and Tay's chapter, although pretty little pictures, is pretty slim pickings. It's a sad manipulation of source material and an indication of why CMI is falling ever farther behind their big cousin, the bumptious AIG, and in the old kid on the block that's also kind of shrinking, ICR. Anyway, on to our little part two. I suppose I should put up our our patrons who are sticking with the old RJ in spite of all of his foibles and folderols. Let's get this here. I again remind everybody, as we are about ready to be diving into economic doom, that if you're able to still help, I'm entirely and wonderfully appreciative, but I can also understand that you got to pay attention to your own circumstances. So everybody, keep your powder dry and watch out for the next circumstances. We're in that anniversary of Black Friday 1929 coming up, and we're moving into the things when inflation cycles and stuff are kicking in more and more, even though at the top, good Lord, the stock market's up at 47,000 on the Dow, which is an indication of all of this speculation that's going on, particularly with AI. Something like 40 to 50% of all the investment things that are going on in the United States all involve AI, and only a couple companies. So it's a very questionable operation, as questionable as the fuel pump on my furnace, as it may turn out. So what's our little part two going on is about a neat little special that I saw on Nova just this last week on these Neolithic killing megastructures that are referred to as kites. They're little, largely low stone walls of maybe a couple feet high, typically, that are on long poles, and then they come in connecting up with big sort of trapezoid things, and they're little, often circular bits around the periphery. And a few of them turn out, these were basically ones they were looking at in Arabia. And the uniformity of the design, quite a large region, indicated some kind of common culture. But the question is, what the hell were these things used for? And how old were they? And as it turns out, it was not an easy task to find radiocarbon datable material. But when they finally could, whoa, these things are like 7,000 BC. And so they are at a time when Arabia was not a desert, but in fact was quite lush with rivers and lots of gazelle herds, because when they were finding some of the these effectively refuse pits and butchering, that huge amounts of gazelles are being trapped into this thing. And it turned out to be a very natural technique of the animals don't like to have boundaries, and so they tend to get funneled in on these things, and they're taking advantage of things, all aiming kind of in the one same direction, so taking track of what were natural migration patterns for the gazelles. And I thought, gosh, that was rather an interesting thing. Plus, it deserved an allusion in Rocks Were There Volume 2, where we're talking about things that are going on in Neolithic history that's predating the creation of the Earth, seemingly, and that we need to pull together. And these are, in fact, some of the oldest stone megalithic structures. They're not apparently dedicated to planetary gods. Instead, they're a very practical hunting culture. But what turned out to be interesting, that I thought warranted sticking a show episode on it, had to do the fact that when I wanted to get some technical materials to find out, well, gosh, it sounds like they should have been doing some technical literature on these points over the years, and it turns out, yep, they have. And even more broadly than I was realizing, because these they were called kites, and still are in the archaeological literature, by the early archaeologists that were mumbling onto these things, and they looked a lot like the shape of a kite. And there were speculations that they could have been used for hunting purposes. Others thought that they had some ritual purpose. But now the more detailed archaeology that's been done just over the past few years has clarified that enormously. But it's the broad range of this technique of having these kite-like animal traps, even though these are not absolutely uniform when you get past Arabia, all suggest, however, there's a fairly common culture of, well, this is how you do it. And also indications from the Arabian case of trading goods and things that don't belong to the Arabian Peninsula, that suggests that this is also trading networks that are going on, possibly migrating people that would be coming in to take advantage of the kill sites as they have their harvest of gazelle in the case of the Arabian site. But how broadly ranged, I was expecting that these would be just about Arabia, but the paper is actually, I'll be putting up a 2023 paper from Cressard et al. That covers a lot of this Arabian work. And then there's some Egyptian sites that are in relatively the same period, and they've also had some dating of that, which actually spreads roughly 9,000 to 5,000. So whether or not they'll hone that down as a result of the new radiocarbon datings that's coming in from the Arabian site, we'll see. But anyway, that one's a 2020 chapter from a book on the whole topic of these kites. And hot off the presses, Verhovnik 2025, regarding ones in the Adriatic. That one was just in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences this week. And I was going, gosh, we were just watching a show on that. So these It's an open access paper, and you can find the little shapings that they've done. An awful lot of the findings of these kite sites has come about by aerial surveys and drone flights and stuff, where they can detect an awful lot of these things quite straightforwardly because they kind of stand out like a sore thumb from the air now that there's no vegetation around because it's been a long time. The Cressard paper, oldest plans to scale of human-made megastructures. That one's from PLOS One. So that one, again, I'll be sticking the linkages in on that. And then here is the ancient game traps at Garb, Aswan, and Lower Nubia. That will be that book chapter that you'll be able to get open access on. So it's an intriguing area because there's certainly work that's being done on the transition from hunter-gatherer to farming cultures that are taking place, particularly along river regions, Indus, China, the Nile, Mesopotamia, and all the rest. But that there would have been a more hunter-gathering, not necessarily agriculture community that is actively doing very sophisticated and collective hunting technique to trap animals. Whether or not different prey were done in different regions would depend on things. And apparently some of this same kite form is showing up probably convergently, even in the Americas. But I haven't gotten a technical paper that's delving into that angle. But so this is likely, given how recent so much of the work is, that there's going to be a lot of follow-up on that. So there's this interesting little zone that's happening that's after the Younger Dryas period, and just around the time that the earliest agriculture is starting to set up, because that's in the 9,000 BCE range, that there's also this whole hunting culture and that's going on with these kites. And that's a lost cultural matrix that I think is going to be really interesting, and I'll be keeping an eye on it in terms of the archaeology from time through. So anyway, that's covering the material here. Next week will be another Luskin show where, spoiler alert, I'm not anticipating any spectacular changes. I'll probably be even chillier until I can get the damn furnace checked out. I'm really worried that it is the fuel pump. That was on death's door the last time I had the bloody thing serviced, and I think it's just bit the dust because there's fuel in the tank. So it's a furnace malfunction in there. Ah, well, such is life. And compared to ICE agents rampaging and potential war in Venezuela and all the other fun and games that Crazy Train Trump is doing around the nation and the world, welcome to our Trump 2.0. Isn't that exciting? Well, remember, we're in Pottersville. I see my Faves News post got put up, and so I'm technically speaking a regular columnist at Faves News here in Spokane. It's formerly the Faves Spokane Faves religious group that I was their atheist, Ask an Atheist guy, and Tracy asked, "Goy, could you be a regular columnist?" And as it happened, I had a potential column in mind, and so we will be chunking out those maybe bi-monthly or monthly, as the case may be, depending on how inspired. But I made it clear that a lot of these are going to be political because we are slogging along in that known zone. It won't necessarily be about matters atheistic or theological, although if something comes up that's relevant, we will possibly do so. So we will see what happens in there. Anyway, I suppose I should put up our little blurb for Roxford there. Come on. And let me get my screen here. I'm not at all fond of the little mouseless scrolling tablet that operates in on the laptop, but such is life. One of these days I'll maybe get another wireless mouse, but that's one of the things on the expenses bill that Unlike Mr. Trump and his $300 million golden ballroom, demolishing the East Wing when he promised that it wouldn't happen. But anybody who thinks that President Trump will avoid lying or changing his mind capriciously has forgotten the fact that he's demented. We're just starting to organize the lunar section now of Rocks Were There Volume 2, which we are hot at work on. Like the first book? Well, golly gosh, have we got tons of stuff on the new one. The finished up all the stupid Hovind and Lost Squadron material and all that. There's also a little bit of peripheral material on planetary system formation and the like that I'm folding in. Some papers that I hadn't had introduced into my. See, when I'm researching material, especially if there gets to be a clog of stuff to do, there may be a situation where I won't be able to get a source immediately into my reference field. For example, this is this current week of stuff, the latest science papers and the like. I'm doing up the abstracts, and you'll notice a little box up in the corner, and it's an empty box. And that's an indication that it's not in my reference field. When I get it into my bibliography, I will put a little check mark across that, and that will corroborate that, and then figure out what potential location it would be. There's a big stack of material that's maybe stuff we'll include in the new book, depending upon whether the specific topics came up or not. And other material directly gets funneled in cases of new papers that directly relate to material that I've already done. There have been some cosmological papers that have popped up in the last week. That also is getting funneled in to the mix. Like a new paper that just came out on the idea that a early silicon-dominated magma core could have functioned as a kind of training wheeled magnetic dynamo prior to the development of the more iron-heavy one that is the current mode that generates our great big magnetic field. So the idea, therefore, that even that a magnetic field can't originate until you get a full-out iron core is not necessarily true. The science continues to fiddle on. So anyway, so it's an ongoing process to kind of keep one step ahead of the material and keeping up with the chapter material and all that. And yes, Jackson, there is all of your material on Noah's Lost Worlds that I got to get to. That's going to be a real fun little thing. But I'm starting to see the edges of the end of the tunnel on that cosmology chapter. But it's a ginormous subject. It's the origin of the universe. It's that whole anthropic fine-tuning argument. It's the origin of planetary systems. It's all the histories of our own planetary system and our wandering gas giants and all the little fun and games involving comets and asteroids and lunar dust and tidal formations and recession of the moon and helium depletion. An awful lot of this stuff is ticking off material that at least half of it is still stuff that's being churned out in the problems with evolution stuff that Answers in Genesis and ICR and various websites put out. So we want to make a point of being up to date and presenting good documentation and sourcing that will show why that stuff is not relevant and incorrect. And once we get past that, then we still have human evolution chapter to deal with. That's one in Jackson's ballpark. There's a lot of stuff to integrate there, and it has been such a fast-moving field just since we did book one, where we were alluding to elements of human evolution in relation, in particular, the chart in the first book to the creationist confusion on whether particular fossils are human or ape, and that this has been noticed by various critics over the years, and it's not improved any, as occasionally the creationists will move a fossil from one category to another, as a lot of their inclusiveness for humans has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, although they still have to be very, very fussy about not getting too close to the edges of the taxonomy, lest we connect up with the Australopithecines, which virtually every creationist refuses to consider there, with the exception of Australopithecus sediba, I think, that ended up being lumped in with the humans, according to, I think, one of Kurt Wise or Todd Wood's baraminology papers, which we will be alluding to. And so the human cultural aspect and all of that, the regardless of where you are in the anti-evolution landscape, human evolution is the big squeaky wheel. And all creationists, when back to a corner, object to that. They do not want human beings to be other than specially created. And that would run the gamut from full-out young earth creationists all the way over into most of the people that you would find in the intelligent design movement. And even though Michael Behe, biochemist, is kind of wiffle-waffly in some of these matters, that the vast majority of them certainly are trying to hold the line on that specially created humans. And therefore, all of their anti-evolution arguments are simply connected up to that. And because you can't really separate out human evolution from non-human evolution in terms of mechanisms and forensic information, to systematics, genetics, and all the rest, that certainly since 1930s, 40s, 50s, it has become, in the anti-evolution literature, increasingly difficult to try to hair split. So the idea that you could accept evolution in everything but humans really has become untenable in the post-genetic era. So they've got to do an all or nothing. They got to draw the line by dumping on evolution in general. So they will be cherry picking about particular topics, which is why you would get things on coelacanth stasis and trilobite eyes, rather than necessarily about human evolution. But by and large, when push comes to shove, most heavy-duty creationists will spend most of their time riffing off the evolution issue. Biggest chapter in Darwin on Trial from Philip Johnson was on human evolution. Some of the biggest sections on anti-evolution in old Dwayne Gish was relating to human evolution. And Roop and Sanford, their whole book on the human evolution matter. So there are meta issues as to why they pick the topics and things that they do. So anyway, everybody check out that stuff. The papers on the kites, those are really quite absolutely fascinating. And as I said, that these are very likely really cutting edge stuff where there's going to be more and more research going on as people are looking into more and more material. Remember, it was very difficult to date the kites because they didn't have, most of them didn't have any organic material. There's just a little wall of brickwork, stonework. And the scale of some of these things, which run for, in case, a mile or more in length, they're not trivial size, it indicated a lot of manpower, maintenance, and all the rest that was really quite extraordinary. Plus, gauging like how high they took advantage of the landscape to work most efficiently in luring the prey into these killing zones. It's an extraordinary cultural framework that's going on here in a form that is not as widely known today. It's a different dynamic. So anyway, everybody stay safe and watch out for weather conditions. A big storm, hurricane coming in the Atlantic, and all the other fuss and bothers that we have around the place. We will see you all next week with another Casey Luskin episode. And take care there, Vesta. And we'll call this one a short one so I can go and do the dishes in the increasingly cool house. Okie dokie, ending the stream.